Welcome to Module 2, where we're going to cover why we resist listening. So in Module 1, we understood that we're not the best listeners. We tend to not actually listen because we have our pals going on. With that said, it's not just the pals that stand in our way of actually listening, it's that we actually have a resistance to listening. Why is that? Well, if you remember the storyline where I shared my personal experience with my son, most of the times in that scenario, I would have resisted to listen because listening meant that I had to see something that as a mother, I probably didn't want to see. I didn't want to see how I overlooked a season in his life as his guardian where I didn't realize he was being bullied. And I remember that time. I remember he all of a sudden was having a hard time getting up and going to school. However, I just equated it to he's growing up and doesn't like school, right? Also, in listening, most likely I would have wanted to resist because then that crashes my idea of how I want to be perceived and seen, that I got my kids scathe free, right? Like untouched to the finish line. So it might mean to me that I'm a failure or I failed as a mom. There's so many reasons in any given scenario that we tend to resist listening because it pokes a hole in how we want to be perceived or how we want to think about ourselves or how we want to see ourselves. We resist listening because if I listen to you, it might reveal something that doesn't allow my storyline to be the way to triumph over whatever it is that might be your perspective. Another reason that we really resist listening is in that scenario, what do you guys think I felt like? Seeing my son hurt, seeing the things he was expressing. Like, what do you think that elicited in me? When I wasn't being defensive, I wasn't trying to soothe, I wasn't trying to make it go away. I was just there, taking in everything that he was unpacking. Pain. In that moment, I didn't just understand what he went through, I felt him. That's why we connected. Most of us do not like to listen. We resist listening because in listening, we might actually have to see what we've been a part of, what we've caused. I've worked lots of times with different spouses, and all of a sudden, there'll be a moment where they really listen to the spouse and then they realize like what their infidelity or what a choice that they made, how it really made their spouse feel. And that is a very uncomfortable feeling. Or parents, oftentimes as they grow older and kids want to express how our raising affected them. Often parents don't want to hear it. They want to defend themselves. But I was a single mother, or I was, right? There's all these reasons why we resist listening because we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to be othered. We don't want to be that person. We don't want to be that thing. We don't want to be that guy. We don't want to be that woman. We don't want to be that mom. We don't want to be that dad. And so we resist listening as a self-defense mechanism that I may maintain my image and identity of how I want and need to be seen and perceived. And that comes back to, in the workshop, I would put up my board and I would say, let's kind of go down the road of how deep this thing goes, right? When your parents were pregnant or when you were expecting a baby, I asked the room, what did you want for this baby? And most people would say for the baby to be healthy, for the baby to have 10 fingers, 10 toes, for the baby to be normal. That's an interesting answer these days, right? But we want them to be healthy, to be normal, to have 10 fingers, 10 toes. And I go, Does that seem like an elaborate expectation? Does that seem demanding? No, right? You just want a healthy baby. I said, okay, now the baby's born. We got a healthy baby. What do we want? And people would look around the room like, for the baby to hit the milestones. And I go, yes. And how do we feel if the baby hits the milestones weeks, months in advance of what it's expected to? Like, what about if the baby walks at 7 months versus a year and 2 months, right? And people would laugh because you feel proud, or you go around sharing. And I share things like, oh, he was barely born and he grabbed my finger so strong and he lifted his head. We share these things because we really want our child to be, meeting the standards or surpassing them, right? And I said, okay, now the baby starts kindergarten. What do we want for this child? And people start getting like, oh, to be good social interactions, to, not bite the children. You want them to be able to pay attention. You want, for them to tell us that our child is well behaved, that they're well mannered, that they're picking up the scissor and hand-eye coordination, right? And then I said, and what happens when we get into later elementary? Oh, well, you want them to have good grades. You want them to, again, seem like a good member of society. Junior high, you want them to be in honors so they could qualify for AP classes. You want them to start getting into sports. You want them to be well-rounded. High school, what do we want then? And everyone starts saying, oh, you want them to graduate. You want them to have volunteer work, and you want them to not get into trouble, right? You want them to excel. And I said, okay. And then after high school, we have day trade or open a business or get a job, hopefully a job that is open with a career path to go up the ladder, or we want them to go to college, right? So you have all these different avenues. And I go, and what do you want from any one of those avenues? Oh, well, you want it to be something that can help them be financially solvent, to have success. Okay, great. So now they finish college, they finish the trade school, they finish whatever it is that they launch a successful business. What do you want for them? Well, now you want them to get some savings, buy a good car, buy a house. And now that they're settled and stable, what do we want? And this has changed, right? Because a lot of people don't want to get married or don't want to have kids. So we're still talking about the social construct in the general. And even though it's changing, we are a product present day of what has been, not what is changing. So when we look at this, what was expected for us? What is it that most people still want for their children? Well, now you want them to get married. You want them to find a loved one. Great. And then what comes after they get married and are stable? Well, you want them to have a child. And so I'd write all of these out, right? And then you want them to have a child. And I'd go, and then I'd put an arrow all the way back to and go, what do we want for that child? And then everyone just kind of laughs, because then it's repeat, 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 generation after generation. And so if there's anything that obstructs, we think it's the end of the world. When our child isn't getting particular grades, when our child is struggling, when our child is maybe having anxiety or depression, when our child is maybe getting curious and getting into substances. That becomes very heavy for us, because they are not staying in the loop. They're not checking off the boxes, and therefore we're not checking off the boxes as a good parent. And so again, that comes back to our image and identity. So we don't want to listen to our children. We don't want to listen to anything. We want to force and control so that we can fall in line with the storyline, the image that we are trying to curate. And more people have strayed away. It's not like the 1950s, where staying in that line was so much easier. The 70s, a lot easier. The 80s, started to see things change. The 90s, the 2000s. 2025, we are so far away from that. And people don't want to conform, and people don't want to fall under this, following these things, but we're still judging. One of the things, for example, I'll get the call about the teenager that's using a substance, and the parent is just distraught about, we got to get them to stop using drugs. And I'm like, how about we find out why they're using? What are they trying to escape? What are they trying to numb? Because the drugs isn't the problem. It's the underlying root of the feeling that they're using the drug for. So again, we resist listening because we are just running with this narrative of this checklist to mark off. And there's nothing wrong with, that we've done this, right? That we live for checking off the checklist. However, can we say that's allowed us to actually live? Or is that more of an existence? And a lot of the times when we look at other generations, they buried, they oppressed, they repressed. They didn't listen to their heart. They didn't listen to their passion. They didn't listen to what they actually wanted to live out. They didn't listen to themselves. Because what is the number one thing that we tend to hear? I just want to make my parents proud. So we're not even living our lives. We're living our lives to make somebody proud. And if you didn't have support from your parents, maybe you want to prove them wrong. So now we're living to make ourselves proud. So again, it's this constant pressure, this checklist. So we're not listening. We resist listening anything that would tell us that we're different, that we're not special, that we're not significant, that we don't meet the mark. So we very much have like this box that we need to fit into: successful, okay, failure. And we resist really connecting with ourselves, our mind, and our heart, and the coherency of that, let alone mind heart coherency with somebody else, because we are so driven by being able to mark our life successful. We're trying to become successful instead of realizing we are success. Just by the fact that we were born into the species of consciousness, that we were the only species on earth that has consciousness, that can create and build. But instead of creating, building, discovering, curiosity, adventure, we're over here trying to conform to, check this list. And so a lot of the times, we're not really experiencing what it is to live because we're sold out in checking these boxes. And so that's the number one reason why you resist listening to anything that deters you from feeling successful. Oftentimes, when working with people, they want to rush with like, oh, I got it, or like, I get it. They get an aha. And I'm like, just because you got an aha, that was just an introduction. Now you got to delve in, and where does that bleed into, and how does that branch out into all the different areas in your life? But most of the times we don't want that. We want to feel good that, oh, I got it. And then that makes us feel like, okay, I'm good now. And it's not that you're not good, but it's the part that we won't allow ourselves to actually digest, sit with things and let them evolve, because we're so consumed, fixated, hyper fixated on being good, appearing good. And so that's the number one reason why we resist listening. We are more sold out, we're more fixated on creating a storyline, a narrative that we are successful. That is module 2.